Vivid verses.
The saw bit into the walnut with a clean, satisfying note, and for a moment the only thing in the world was the grain opening up under the blade. I've been working on this chest for 3 weeks now, dovetails by hand, no shortcuts. The piece would outlive me. There was something deeply settling about that. Through the small window above my bench, I could see the kitchen light come on in the house. Hannah was home. I checked my watch. 7:40. She'd be making the tea she liked, the one with the dried elderflower in it, and she'd be glancing through the window toward the workshop the way she did now. That calculating glance she probably didn't know she was doing. Trying to figure out my mood from 40 feet away. Trying to determine whether tonight would require a conversation. I set the saw down and ran my palm along the cut. Smooth. Even. She'll come out in about 20 minutes. She always does on Tuesdays. She'll bring me a cup of something I won't drink and ask how my day was. And somewhere in the next 3 sentences, she'll mention a podcast or an article or something a friend said. And that'll be the opening move. I knew her patterns the way I knew the grain of walnut. 2 years of careful observation will do that. I picked up the chisel and started cleaning out a pin socket. The work was good. The work asked nothing of me except attention. The door opened at 8:03. Close enough. Hey. Her voice was light, careful. She had a steaming mug in one hand and her phone in the other. The phone was the tell. The phone meant she'd been reading something. Hey. I didn't look up from the chisel. I brought you some of that lemon ginger. Thanks. Set it on the bench. She did. She lingered. I could feel her weighing whether to come closer or stay by the door. She chose the door. Smart move on her part. The workshop was the one space where I'd made it clear, without ever quite saying it, that the rules of the house didn't apply. In here, I was alone, even when she was standing 6 feet away. How was your day? Fine. I blew sawdust out of the socket. Productive. A pause. I counted in my head. 3, 2, 1. I was thinking, she said, and there was, maybe this weekend we could try the thing Dr. Aronson suggested. The Saturday check-in. Dr. Aronson. The new one. The third one. The first one didn't validate her framework strongly enough. The second one made the mistake of suggesting that maybe I wasn't the only person in this marriage with patterns to examine. Dr. Aronson, by all accounts, has been more cooperative. I said, just 30 minutes. We'd each get 15 to share what we're carrying. I'll think about it. That's what you said last week. I finally looked up. Hannah was 36, sharp-faced, very pretty in a way that registered more in stillness than in motion. She'd cut her hair shorter last month. It suited her. I told her so, and she'd looked at me like I'd handed her a check that might bounce. I did think about it last week, I said. I thought about it, and decided I wasn't ready. That's a complete answer. It feels like avoidance. And there's the move. Name what I'm doing, ascribe a motive to it, and now I'm supposed to either defend myself, which validates the frame, or concede, which validates the frame. 2 doors, same room. It might be avoidance, I said evenly. Or it might be that I'm tired and I'd like to finish this dovetail before I lose the light. Both can be true. She held the door frame with one hand, the way she did when she was bracing for something. You used to want to talk to me. I used to talk to you a lot, I agreed. I remember. I held her eyes long enough for her to feel it, then turned back to the wood. She stood there another 15 seconds. I could feel her trying to find the next sentence and not finding one she liked. Eventually she left. The door clicked shut. I exhaled. That was the gentlest version. There would be others. We'd been married long enough for there to be a before and an after, but not so long that anyone would call us established. Long enough to have routines. Long enough that the routines had calcified into something more like terms of service. The first 18 months, I'd been an apt pupil. Hannah had a vision of what a marriage should be, and the vision had documentation. Articles she'd flag and forward. Books she'd dog-ear and leave on the coffee table with a particular passage face up. She discovered, sometime in our first year, a writer named Cordelia Matthews who ran an online course called The Conscious Partnership, and she'd taken the 8-week module twice. After the second time, she'd printed out the worksheets. I'd done the worksheets. I'd done the worksheets in good faith, which is the part one had to remind myself of when the resentment threatened to ferment into something less manageable. I had genuinely tried. I'd read the books. I'd attended the weekend workshop in our second autumn, sitting in a folding chair next to Hannah while a woman named Bryony talked about repair attempts and bids for connection. I'd taken notes. I'd come home and try to use the new vocabulary. The system, as Hannah constructed it from her sources, had several pillars. There was the weekly emotional inventory, which lived in a shared spreadsheet. We were each supposed to log what we'd felt during the week, label our triggers, and identify our contribution to any friction. Hannah's entries were detailed and frequent. Mine were always wrong, somehow. Too brief, too defensive, too focused on situations rather than feelings. I tried writing longer, more emotionally textured entries, and those, it turned out, were also wrong because they centered my experience over hers. There were the check-ins. Monday morning, Wednesday evening, Saturday afternoon. The Saturday one was the longest. We were supposed to use a script that began with "I appreciate you for," and ended with something I'm holding that I'd like to share. The script came from one of the books. It was a good script, probably in the abstract, used between two people who chose to share what they wanted to share, used as a tool of mutual disclosure. What became, in practice, was an interrogation rail. There was the privilege ledger, which was a phrase I never said out loud, but which I used in my own head. The ledger tracked the asymmetries between us. It tracked things she perceived me as having that she didn't, and what I owed in acknowledgement for them. Some items on the ledger were reasonable. Some were inventions. Most fell in between, which was, I came to understand, the design. A system you can sometimes legitimately object to is more durable than one you always can. The legitimate items legitimize the others by association. And there was the apology architecture. Apologies in our marriage had a form. A correct apology contained an acknowledgement of the specific harm, an articulation of the impact on her, a statement of accountability without qualifier, a description of what I'd do differently, and ideally a thank you for her labor in pointing it out. An apology that contained the word but was disqualified. An apology that explained context was disqualified. An apology that arrived too quickly was performative. An apology that arrived too slowly was reluctant. I'd written apologies in our shared note app for the first year and a half. I kept a running list the way she suggested so that I could see my growth. I went back and read them sometimes in those last months before I stopped, and what I noticed was that none of them had been accepted in any way that closed the matter. Every apology was a deposit on a debt that grew faster than the deposits. That was the moment, sometime around month 18, when I started doing the math. If the apologies didn't reduce the debt, then they weren't apologies. They were tribute. And tribute paid to a system that doesn't recognize satisfaction is just a recurring fee. I stopped paying. I didn't announce it. I didn't sit her down and explain it. I didn't fight, didn't lecture, didn't deliver a speech I'd rehearsed in the car. I simply gradually became polite. The workshop was the first move, though I didn't think of it as a move at the time. I'd built it in our first summer. A standalone shed at the back of the property, 12 by 16, insulated and wired, with a workbench I'd built first before everything else, like setting up the easel before painting the picture. Hannah had been enthusiastic about it. A hobby. Healthy. Manly in the way she liked to gesture at without quite endorsing. For the first year, I went out there on weekends. Built a coffee table, a side table, a little stool for the back patio. The work was pleasant but peripheral. Then I started going on weeknights. An hour after dinner. Then 2 hours. Then, eventually, the routine I lived in now. Home from work, dinner together, dishes, workshop until I was tired enough to sleep. The gym was the second move. I'd never been particularly athletic. I started going at 6 in the morning, before she was up. By the time I came home, showered, and left for work, we'd exchanged maybe 10 sentences. Then in the evening, the workshop. Then sleep. I was, by any objective measure, holding up my end of the marriage. I cooked twice a week. I did the grocery shopping. I handled the cars, the yard, the bills. I was pleasant in conversation. I asked after her day and listened to the answer. I attended the things I'd agreed to attend. What I'd stopped doing was offering anything she could use. No confessions, no anxieties, no insecurities, no late night unburdening. No vulnerability she could file away for later cross-reference. No sharing that could be reframed as a microaggression in 3 weeks when she was in a different mood. I'd become, in our marriage, a polite stranger who happened to share a mortgage. She'd been slow to notice. That was the thing about a system designed around managing my deficiencies. It didn't have a good way of measuring my absence. The spreadsheet had no column for husband present but withdrawn. The check-ins relied on my participation, and I participated minimally. I showed up, I gave the shortest acceptable answers, I waited the script out. She'd started noticing maybe 6 weeks ago. Small things. The way she looked at me across the kitchen sometimes, like she was trying to remember where she'd seen me before. The increased frequency of the articles she sent. The way she'd started introducing topics with "I wanted to share something with you," instead of just sharing it, as if she'd realized she needed to flag her bids more clearly. Tonight had been one of those nights. Tonight, I could tell from the tea and the phone and the careful tone, she'd been reading something about stonewalling or contempt or one of the 4 horsemen, and she was building toward a confrontation. She'd asked me to commit to a structured conversation. She'd asked me what was wrong. She'd offered to bring in a mediator or schedule a couples intensive or take me on a retreat. The next move from her side would be a sit-down, a formal one. I packed up the chisels and swept the bench clean. The chest could wait until tomorrow. I needed to be rested. She'd waited until the next evening, which was sooner than I'd expected. I came in from the workshop at 10, and she was sitting at the kitchen table with 2 glasses of water and her notebook open. The notebook was a bad sign. The notebook meant she'd prepared. "Can we talk?" she said. She'd done her hair. That was another tell. When she did her hair before conversation, it meant she wanted to feel like she had the advantage. Sure. I washed my hands at the sink, dried them on a dish towel, and sat across from her. Notebook open to a fresh page. Pen capped, set parallel to the spine. She's not going to read from prepared notes. Too obvious. She's going to use the notebook to write down what I say. That's the move. She wants quotes for later. "I've been feeling something for a while," she said, "and I think we need to address it honestly." "All right. You feel very far away to me. For months. Maybe longer." I nodded once. "Okay." She waited. I let the silence sit. She wants me to fill it. She wants me to apologize, or explain, or get defensive. Any of those would give her something to work with. Silence gives her nothing. After a few seconds, she went on. "Can you tell me what's been going on for you?" "Not really, no." Her face did a small adjustment. She'd been ready for evasion, for a long answer, for an excuse. The flat no wasn't in her decision tree. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I don't have something to report. I'm fine. Work is fine. I've been busy with the chest, which you've seen. I sleep well. I go to the gym. I don't have a problem I need to talk about. But you're not present with me." I held her gaze. "I'm sitting across from you right now. You know what I mean? I'd like you to say what you mean, instead of relying on me to know." The pen moved an inch on the table. She didn't pick it up. She wants to write down relying on me to know. but she doesn't want me to see her do it. Progress. I mean emotionally present. Available. You used to be a person I had access to. Now you feel like a roommate. That's it? I'm thinking. I let myself think, actually, for about 10 seconds. I'd planned for this conversation in pieces over the last several weeks, but planning isn't the same as living it. I want to be sure I said what I meant the first time. You're right, I said. She blinked. That I'm not emotionally available the way I used to be. That's an accurate observation. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Okay. She sounded uncertain. The agreement had thrown her. Can you tell me why? I can. But I want to be clear before I do that this isn't a negotiation. I'm not telling you why so that we can fix it. I'm telling you why because you asked. The pen finally got picked up. She set it back down. I don't know what that means. I'll explain that too. Take your time. She took her time. She drank some water. She uncapped the pen and capped it again. I waited. She's recalibrating. The framework she's been operating in assumes that if she asks the right question the right way, I'll produce material she can work with. The framework doesn't have a contingency for me declining to be material. Okay, she said finally. Go ahead. I took a breath. Here's the part you've thought through. Don't rush it. Don't lecture. Make it observations, not accusations. Make her do the work of disagreeing. About 18 months ago, I said, I noticed a pattern. The pattern was that everything I shared with you about my inner life became evidence against me at some later date. Not always immediately. Sometimes weeks later. Sometimes months. But consistently. If I told you I felt insecure about something at work, that insecurity would surface in a future conversation as a reason I'd handled something badly. If I told you I was struggling with my brother, that struggle would surface later as evidence I had unresolved family patterns affecting our marriage. If I told you I'd had a bad day, the bad day would surface later as the reason I'd been short with you, even when I hadn't been short with you. Every vulnerability became a future weapon. Not an intentional one, necessarily. But functionally, that's what it was. She started to say something. I held up a hand gently. I'd like to finish. She closed her mouth. I noticed another pattern, which was that the standards I was being measured against shifted. When I met them, they changed. When I changed my language the way the article suggested, you'd find a deeper level of language to ask for. When I started doing the check-ins themselves became insufficient, and we needed a new format. When I apologized in the form you asked for, the apologies were either too quick or too rehearsed, and either way they weren't accepted in a way that closed the matter. I want to be clear that I'm not blaming you for any single instance. I'm describing the aggregate. The aggregate was that the game was unwinnable. There was no version of me, short of total compliance with a framework that kept expanding, that would satisfy the system. And total compliance wasn't on the table because total compliance would have erased me. So I made the decision around month 18 to stop playing. I didn't tell you because telling you would have just generated another round of conversation about my behavior. I didn't fight you because fighting would have given the system something to metabolize. I just stopped offering. I kept the practical commitments. I cook, I shop, I handle the cars, I show up to your family things. I'm polite, but I stopped offering the part of myself that had been getting filed and cross-referenced. You're noticing now because the system needs raw material to run, and I've stopped supplying it. The panic you're feeling isn't about me being distant. It's about the framework not having anything to process. I stopped. She was very still. The pen was in her hand, but she hadn't written anything. Her face had gone through 3 expressions while I was talking and had landed on something I couldn't read, which was rare. That's a lot, she said quietly. It is. You've been thinking about this for a long time. Yes. She set the pen down. She looked at the notebook. She closed it. That was something. That was possibly the first real thing she'd done in this conversation that wasn't a move. I don't agree with most of what you just said. You don't have to. I think you're describing my care as control. I considered it. I'm describing what I experienced. Whether your intent was care or control isn't something I can know from the inside. I can only describe the pattern as it landed. That's a very tidy way to refuse responsibility. Move. Reframe his observation as evasion. Make him defend the form of his statement rather than the content. It might be, I said, or it might be an accurate description of an asymmetric situation. You're free to think it's the former. What do you want then? There it was. The real question. The question she'd been circling for months without asking. I thought about this one a lot. I want to keep living here for now, I said. I want to be polite, fulfill the practical obligations, and have the rest of my evenings to myself. If, at some point, you decide that's not enough for you, we can have a conversation about what happens next. But I'm not going to re-enter the framework. The framework isn't something I'm willing to live inside anymore. That's not a marriage. It's the marriage I'm able to offer right now. You can decide what to do with that. She stood up, not angrily. She didn't do anger, which was part of how the system worked, but she stood up. She picked up her glass and the notebook and walked to the doorway. She stopped there, her back to me. You used to love me. I didn't answer right away. Don't lie. Don't twist the knife. Don't soften it past the truth. I did, I said. I'm not sure what I feel anymore. I haven't been able to find out because every time I checked in with myself, you used the answer against me. I like to find out eventually, but not in the current arrangement. She left the kitchen. I heard the bedroom door close. Not slammed. Closed. I sat at the table for a while longer, drinking water I hadn't asked for. That had gone, I thought, about as well as it could have gone. I hadn't been cruel. I hadn't pleaded. I hadn't cataloged grievances. I named the pattern, named my response to it, and named the terms I could live with. The next move was hers. I went out to the workshop and worked on the chest for another hour. The walnut was cooperative tonight. The cuts were clean. The next morning, she was already at the kitchen table when I came down. She had coffee. She'd been crying. I could tell, though she'd washed her face. She gestured to the chair across from her. I sat. I talked to Marisol last night. Marisol was her closest friend. A therapist, actually, though not ours. The mention of Marisol meant Hannah had been processing, which could go in any number of directions. Okay. She said some things I want to share with you. All right. She said that some of what you said last night might be worth sitting with. Interesting. Marisol is more honest than I'd given her credit for. Okay. She also said that the way you said it was a kind of contempt. And she pointed out that it's easy to declare a system broken when you've benefited from being able to opt out of it. I let that one breathe. There was a real thing in it. There was a real thing in a lot of what Hannah said, which was part of what made the system so hard to step out of. The system was constructed of real things, arranged in such a way that no individual real thing was the problem, but the arrangement was. Both of those might be partially true, I said. I'll think about the first one. The second one I want to push back on a little. Okay, I don't think opting out of a framework is the same as benefiting from being able to ignore the things the framework was responding to. Some of the things the framework was responding to are real. The framework itself is something different. The framework is the response. You can think the response is excessive without dismissing what it was responding to. She thought about that. She actually thought about it. I could see her doing it, which was the first time in a while. I'd like to ask you something, she said, and I'd like an honest answer. Okay, are you having an affair? I almost laughed but caught it. Of course she's asking. From inside her framework, the withdrawal has to have a cause she can name. An affair would explain it. An affair would also locate the problem in me, which would let the framework continue. No, you tell me. I'm telling you. No, I'm not. She nodded. She seemed to believe me, which she should, because it was true. Then what is it? I've told you what it is. You've told me what you experienced. You haven't told me what you want. She's still asking the question, but the tone is different. It's not a move now. It's a question. I told you last night what I want in the short term. I want to keep living here, hold up my practical end, and have my evenings. In the longer term, I don't know. I genuinely don't know. I haven't been able to want anything for a while because wanting things felt risky. Risky how? Wanting something specific gave you a place to push. Wanting nothing in particular was safer. She closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, she said, I didn't know I was doing that. Maybe she didn't know. Maybe she half knew. Maybe she's deciding now whether to admit it and how much. The answer doesn't actually matter that much. What matters is what happens next. I don't need you to have known, I said. I'm not interested in establishing your guilt. I don't want an apology. I'm telling you because you asked. What would help? I don't know yet. I like to try to find out. I don't want to do that inside the framework. I like to set the framework aside. I looked at her for a long moment. She's saying the right thing. She might even mean it, right now, in this moment. The question is whether she can sustain it, or whether the framework will return in 2 weeks under a new name. Most likely it'll return, but maybe not. The honest answer is I don't know. I'd be willing to see what that looks like, I said. I'm not promising anything, but I'd be willing to see. Okay. And I'd like to be clear that I'm not going to start participating in things again as a show of good faith. If I want to talk, I'll talk. If I don't, I won't. The check-ins are done. The spreadsheet is done. I'll cancel the Dr. Aronson appointments. She started to object, then stopped. Okay. And I like to keep my evenings. The workshop, the gym. That's not negotiable for me. I need that to remain mine. Okay. If you want time with me, you can ask. I'll consider each ask on its own. But I'm not going back to a default of availability. She looked down at her coffee for a long time. I waited. I'd said what I needed to say. The next move was hers. I don't know if I can live like that, she said quietly. I want to try, but I don't know if I can. That's an honest answer. I appreciate it. You let me leave. I let you decide. Whatever you decide is what I'd live with. That's terrifying. It might be. It's also the only arrangement I can offer in good faith. She nodded, very slowly. She drank her coffee. We sat in the kitchen for another few minutes without saying anything, and it wasn't a bad silence. It wasn't a good silence either. It was a silence that had stopped pretending to be something else, which was, I thought, the first piece of honest furniture in our house in a long time. I got up to make breakfast. She watched me crack eggs and didn't reach for her phone, didn't open her notebook, didn't bring out a new article. She watched me crack eggs, and that was all she did. It wasn't much, but it was different. She moved into the guest room a week later. Not as a punishment, she said, and not as a separation. Just to give us both some space to figure out what we wanted without the proximity of the bed making us perform something we didn't feel. I didn't object. I helped her carry her books in. The days settled into a new pattern. We were both careful, but the carefulness was a different texture now. Before, the carefulness had been about managing each other's reactions. Now it was about not slipping back into the old shapes. She caught herself a few times reaching for the framework. Once at dinner, when she started to ask if we could circle back to something I'd said and stopped mid-sentence and said, "Actually, never mind, it's not important." Another time when she handed me a book and then thought better of it and put the book back on the shelf. I caught myself too. I caught myself the first week defaulting to monosyllables when she asked me something when actually I had more to say. I had to remind myself that the rule wasn't withhold. The rule was don't be processed. Those were different rules. The first one was a posture. The second one was a principle. The principle let me, gradually, say more. Not the deep things, not yet. The deep things would wait. But surface things, observations, the small textures of day. She received them without writing anything down. She received them and offered her own. A piece of office gossip. A song she'd heard. The way her sister had been on the phone. It was a marriage of sorts. A thinner one than the one we'd had before, or the one we'd had before that. The one in the very beginning before the framework. It might thicken back up, eventually. It might not. I didn't have to decide that yet. About 3 weeks in, she came out to the workshop one evening. She knocked, which was new. I called her in. She stood by the door, looking around. "I haven't been in here in a long time," she said. "No, you've made a lot." "Some." She walked over and ran her hand along the chest, which was almost finished. The dovetails were tight. The lid sat flush. She drew a fingertip along the seam where 2 boards met, where I'd been most worried about the match. "Is this walnut?" "Yeah. It's beautiful." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. She stood with her hand on the chest for a while. Then she said, "I read something today, and I didn't send it to you." "Okay." I wanted to, but I read it again and realized I wanted to send it because I wanted you to think the way I thought about the thing in it. So I didn't. I looked up from my work. "That's a good catch. I wanted you to know I caught it. Thank you for telling me." She nodded. She stayed another minute, looking at the chest, and then she said good night and went back to the house. I worked another half hour on a corner that wasn't fitting right. Then I shut the workshop down and walked across the yard. The kitchen light was on. The bedroom light was on, hers in the guest room. I went inside and made tea. The lemon ginger, not the elderflower. I didn't want to perform something and drank it standing at the counter. Whatever was going to happen between us was going to happen slowly, on terms neither of us had used before. I didn't know if we'd make it. I knew I wasn't going back. I knew she might not be able to live with the version of me that wasn't going back. I knew there was a real possibility I had to be able to absorb. I also knew, standing there with the lemon ginger going cold, that I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, which was here. I was here. I wasn't being processed. I wasn't being measured. I was a man drinking tea in a kitchen, married to a woman in the next room, and the marriage was what it was, and I was what I was, and the work was the work. I rinsed the cup, set it upside down on the drying rack, and turned out the kitchen light. The hallway was dark. Hers was the second door on the right. I paused at the door of my own room, the one that had been ours and was now mine for the moment, and listened to the house. The house was quiet, not the hell-breath quiet of the last 2 years. A different quiet, the quiet of a place where people lived and weren't currently performing. I went into my room and closed the door behind me, gently, the way she'd closed the bedroom door the night I'd told her the truth in the kitchen. Not slammed, closed. It was a small thing, but it was the door I'd chosen, and I closed it myself, and tomorrow I'd open it on my own terms, and that for the first time in a long time was enough.
Thanks for listening.